Hi, and welcome to another episode of The War Bunker.
Oh yeah, so I just want to talk you through these guys. About 6 months, and this is about 6 months of effort, which has got a bit crazy. Just going to scan through them all. I discovered a company called Mantic. Me and Cameron, my son, have been kind of preparing for what was supposed to be a small campaign, which we still haven't started, that was going to involve some leftovers of the squats, and I wanted to kind of get a few you can see how a few's kind of escalated a little bit, a few space dwarves for it. Kind of got hooked. Mantic produced some really decent figures. They're not quite, they're about on a par of where Games Workshop quality was about 15 years ago, yeah. So you don't quite get as many modelling options, but you do get a lot of figures for your money. They're really, some of the collections are really quite cheap, and I kind of kept buying them, and particularly I got several copies of what's called of the starter set, which ironically just about 2 hours ago I just threw away the box set off. I can just show you the box outside. But the starter set gives you like a collection of basic, some of these what's called Forgefather figures, and also some Marauders, which are kind of their version of Orcs. So I've kind of like been busy assembling and painting these individually. It was only really when I brought them out to the table I realised quite just how many I'd kind of ended up with. Some of these have been a recycling of. So this guy here is it's an old Warhammer sniper from Warhammer Fantasy, a dwarf sniper of some sort, and basically, although Warpath is quite an interesting game itself, we're kind of using this as a substitute salamander army at the minute, and I've because anyone that's watched the channels knows that of course I've got I've quite a large Space Marine army, about 250 to 300 figures. These guys, which I use the Iron Hand rules, which is kind of handy. So kind of building another Space Marine army, whoop-de-doo. But it's been fun. It's been a fun project. I don't really care if I never really play these much. It's been really quite a lot of fun, kind of just assembling and working, particularly working with conversions. I bought some flyers for them, which were like a Robo Gear thing off eBay. I mean, although War Machine, it's not War Machine, it's Warpath is a really well thought out game, and the rules flow quite well. We're kind of, this guy just won't. The base isn't great. Oh, there's a join in the table about there. I think I was standing on there. Although the rules are really good, we do play more Warhammer 40,000 than anything else. So we're using these as like a salamander army, and even so, we found that they play the way that the new Space Marines Codex has been giving special rules. So the salamander has to have special rules with flamers, and if you take the Chapter Master, who isn't too expensive, it gives you some ridiculous multi-melter. So this, for instance, is what I'm using as a kind of dreadnought a minute, and I'll just go and just pull out so you can see next to them. There you go, a bit of comparison. It's pretty good scale. Obviously, being dwarfs, it should be smaller. But what's quite amazing about these guys is this is a complete resin, so Warhammer would just like be really expensive. and I've fit him with a multi-melter, and we say he's got a heavy flamer as well. So if you take that chapter master, you've got rerolls on misses with the multi-melters and rerolls to wounds with the flamers, and that makes it like really quite amazing. And when we put the storm wolves against the when we put them against storm wolves, basically iron hands, against the salamanders, they play differently, and I have to admit Cameron has absolutely crushed me playing against the salamanders. They have a bit more punch. This is an adapted. This is another Mantic thing, but I've adapted it to be a dwarf. But this is the kind of Rough Rider things that the orcs have. I'm using this as a land speeder. Bought this thinking I'd be able to use it as a predator. It's an armoured car from the Second World War on a 1:48 scale, but it doesn't quite look big enough to be a predator that I'd hoped it to be. And what's quite amusing, you can see I've built the ram on the front. There's a lot of equipment right there, but in actual fact, it turns out, looking at the box again and looking at the thing, it's actually supposed to be that way. And it's hilarious because my son goes, "You built it backwards," but it does kind of look. And using this as a land speeder as well. Like I said, we've got 3 of those things that we use as the storm talon, if I want to. I mean, but also in that colour scheme, we've kind of there's loads of quite cool flamer guys that we got that I bought separately. A lot of the figures are resin, some are plastic. I'm kind of pleased with them. This is developed. Part of the fun of playing around with something like this is just mucking around with your own back history for the whole unit. And it's very, very complex. I think I've written about 20 odd pages of it. It's sometimes it gets obsessive when it's like that, because you're going like, well, why am I writing quite so much back history? But basically, the history is that the dwarves or squats were indeed the Warhammer 40,000 squats that we knew and loved before they got axed. And yes, just like it talks about in the back history, their worlds got trampled upon and they got overrun by tyrannids. So what stragglers were left basically found a deep, dark sector of space to go and hide in, and they live in these massive kind of world ships, and kind of live in they never want to live on planets again because they're basically being scared off, and they basically earn out a living basically mining asteroids, and they basically choose the most inhospitable area of space that they can. They produce lots of mechanics. We've got several schools of a bit like the tower. They've got several castes, or what they call guilds. So there's a guild of mining, a kind of guild of engineering, gear of warriors, and guild of trading. And all dwarfs are brought up to kind of know a little bit of each, but when they're about 13, they kind of specialise, because they mine. And dwarves like to eat. They love to eat. So they have artificial foodstuffs, but they absolutely love to trade their engineering and things that they build for food. They love fresh foods and meats. It's something they can't do a lot themselves. They're not particularly brilliant farmers, and they certainly don't have farm worlds. They can create artificial foodstuffs, but it's not great. Food's a great commodity. They trade a lot with the town. What they do is they have a real vendetta against the humans, and these guys are basically again these are what we call enforcers from Warpath, but in the backstory to my squat group, they're called the Ironsmiths, Basically, any human that tries to fight them or anything, they tend to abduct them, and it's kind of a bit hideous, but they kind of end up lobotomizing them and turning them into a kind of a servitor thing. So they've got an army of these servitors that they call golems, which are really loyal servants, and mainly they use them for mining in very dangerous areas where they're called the canaries, because they're basically expendable labour. And the idea is that humans that have fought against the dwarves are basically turned into kind of a machine man to basically try and earn back any wrongdoing that they've done against the squats. And interestingly enough, me and Cameron have just finished listening to an autobiography of a panzer commander, and after the Second World War, a lot of Russians had this kind of mentality. They abducted a lot of German army people who basically caused trouble for them, and particularly through the SS, had done massive atrocities against the Russian people. Not all German officers and army were involved, but believe me, the few that were involved in the atrocities, they were pretty bad. And they basically said, you've done so much damage to our people, you've got to kind of earn your way back. And in a way, this is continuing that vile tradition. It's an interesting point, because it allows what could be, with anything that you write in Warhammer, it's very easy to kind of write a utopia, but you've got to try and avoid that, because obviously it's a dark future. It's not particularly cool. Some of the things I've been fiddling around with, I mean, as you can tell from there, some of the fun is just kind of adapting and tweaking and building things. Again, kind of adapting tanks. This is something I've used as a Bane blade. It's based on a 1:32 Israeli Carver, I believe it's called, tank. I've taken what was the gun from there, one of these kind of guns, and fitted it into the turret. Took a couple of 1:76 turrets like here, and fitted them with some weapons, and there's a Nike iron cannon there. That looks pretty cool. Certainly having a look at some of the Bane plates you can actually buy, it's pretty cool. And just to kind of give you a scale, that's a full-size Land Raider next to it, so it is fairly bigger. This is pretty good. And as a kind of Land Raider substitute, because when you've got an unofficial army, I'm never going to be able to play these guys in a tournament ever, because they're not really on Warhammer. It's just kind of to have something extra to play. I mean, to be honest, I've got my my Storm Wolves here, and I could easily change the rules, but it was just fun building all this. And this is a kind of Land Raider substitute, and I'll show you against. And again, this is an adapted 1:32. Which one's this? Oh, Stug. It's a German Stug. Excellent model. Interesting tank as well. Again, if you're into Second World War history. I've played it a few times on World of Tanks as well. Again, a nice size compared to it. I've just covered it with like loads of a spare piece of equipment, because I was originally trying to turn this into a salvage tractor, but I kind of ended up going, this is actually really cool, and kept kind of modifying it. And this is actually the cannon off the Carver, the Israeli tank, because it just didn't. Warhammer tanks tend to be quite exaggerated, and they have a lot bigger cannon than you would expect for the size. But anyway, those are those two tanks, which is pretty cool. Just no, put the wrong one away. Just for some scaling. So that's obviously Warhammer Terminator. That's a dwarf, one of the big dwarf leaders, which, as you can imagine, is slightly shorter than a Terminator. It would feel a bit awkward if you had dwarfs that were taller than Terminators. That's one of the general enforcer soldiers. It's interesting looking at them, of course. Everyone reading a lot of articles. Warhammer 40,000 is called, I think it's 28mm kind of heroic, which makes you realise just how exaggerated the width on things like the Terminators and Space Marines are, because they're made to be a lot more broad than they'd really be. And when you look at a figure such as the Enforcer soldier here next to it, it's quite thin and weedy by comparison, but they are really good figures. Hellish to assemble though. Just the Enforcers are. There's a bit of cursing and swearing as you're trying to superglue it. And this is what's called an Enforcer and Peacekeeper armor, which just only the leaders are supposed to have. And you can see it's quite a good likeness. In fact, what I've done is I've ordered one of these, fit it with a shield and kind of Warhammer to give myself an extra Terminator, Assault Terminator, because I had 5, and I think, well, sometimes it would be nice to have 6, and I've actually sneaked that into a tournament and nobody noticed. A few extra things. I kind of got carried away with the colour scheme, and we had a bit of a clear out. This is my captain's kind of. This isn't really going to be. This is ever going to be used in a game. It's a fighting thing, but sometimes you just like to just put something. For instance, okay, there's a round thing. That's a landing pace, and there's a ship on the landing pace. Okay, what you've got to do is you've got to get the secret intelligence onto the ship, or you've got a rescue mission to the ship. It makes it for an interesting objective, and I enjoy having that kind of colouring the thing. It is obviously a Darth Vader's TIE fighter that I just kind of, which was kind of good, but it's just a toy basically. It's a toy that had a speaking base, and I think you could fire missiles from the base, and it was good, but the base broke and certain things had broken. So what I did was I've just ended up like gluing it together and kind of adapting it slightly. You can see there's some modifications to make it just look a little bit different. But yeah, a nice little bit of scenery just to throw there. And we were having a clear out. The X-Wing that came with that, it was just broken up to pieces because we packed it a bit badly. So yeah, so it's nice to actually get some use out of that. And likewise, this used to be a thing. You used to press a button, it would make kind of telephone ringing, boo boo boo, space noise. And again, I just kind of took the model and just kind of base coated it, and ended up having it. I put an enamel on originally just because it was the only thing that would stick to it, and it wasn't that impressive as a toy, to be honest. It was rather crude, but you throw paint on these things and it has enough features and stuff that it really kind of took. And this is what I'd call in the backstory is called a sky crane, basically, because what happens, shifting hands here, is basically this thing comes down, it kind of like attaches onto there, and it kind of whooshes the whole unit away, and it's basically a way that they bring tanks and heavy equipment to the battlefield. The guys that pilot this are kind of considered slightly crazy. It doesn't have any armaments, but it kind of creates like a null graviton field around both the freighter and the tank. And once it's hooked up together, it's kind of bonded together, and then it can kind of go up and it can just do crazy kind of stunts with the tank assembled. It has virtually no armament. Well, it doesn't have any armament because it's kind of a freighter, and they just believe on the thing is to get these down, get your tank down, and then get the hell out of there. But it'll come down usually with an escort with a couple of these. Is that like the backstory? Like I say, when you create your own army, muck around with it was one of the reasons that building an ultramarine, for instance, army never really appealed to me, because when you say, okay, I'm making my own army, they're the Iron Hawks or whatever, you're given the free hand to kind of like shape that army and give the characters whatever you want to. Whereas if you're you're an ultramarine army, you kind of bound to abide by the rules of the ultramarines and the backstory of that. And for people like me and Cameron, it kind of being able to have that control and be able to choose what's going on is kind of half the fun of this. Kind of where you spend a lot. Certainly, I do spend a lot more time. Certainly, I have this year. Spend that because this is six months of effort you're looking at here. And the colour scheme you start off with, and it seems really cool, and by the time you've finished your 120th figure, you're just sick to death and wished you'd kind of tried something else. But I'm quite pleased with the whole army. But yeah, like I say, generally you're going to spend more time painting, unless you have a small army, than you are playing. And kind of say, for me, the creating the army, creating the feel of the army, the how the army works, who's who in the army, and the lore of the army is half the appeal, really, of building an army. And I don't think I'd have it any other way. Getting yourself inside the skin of of the people that you're creating. Yeah. Playing the games afterwards is kind of fun. Let's face it, it's the reason why you could do all that. But yeah, it's nice to think, messing around with the squat, looking at the models, and then kind of trying to create the backstory. You kind of get really into it, and you a bit like Tolkien, you end up kind of developing a whole world around something just to explain why you've got people with a hammer or something like that. It's just crazy, but it's interesting. It's quite fun as well, and it's anything that allows you to use your imagination like that is kind of really cool. Anyway, enough of that. I hope you enjoyed it. Kind of like the preview of the army. We hope to be using this in an upcoming campaign, and I might well hold this video off until we've done that campaign. Yeah. Catch you around.